All right. Hey, everybody. It's Coach Hughes here from the Be Best You podcast. So to lead others, you need to be the best version of yourself. And I am super excited to have on this podcast today, Eric Chester. Hello, Eric.
Hello, John. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I really want Eric to share some of his insights, but I've known Eric for quite a time now. He was kind enough to take me under his wing at a National Speakers Association. And then I was able to have Eric actually do some work with the company I'm with. He was a keynote speaker. He did some breakout sessions for us, and he also did a couple other projects. And he's part of the team. He's part of the family, and he's a good friend of mine. And I love everything about him. But what I wanted to talk to you today about, Eric, is start off with you have a book out here called Fully Staffed. And today, I think this is even more important than ever. And I wrote down two questions. And one of them is, can you speak to kind of maybe the mindset shift that people need to have today? Meaning everyone is always saying how hard it is to find people. But you were writing about that 30 years ago. And in your book, you speak of this as well. If you just ponder on how hard it is, nothing gets done. And how you have to kind of mind shift to not problems, but what are the solutions and how do we solve it? And I love the fishing versus hunting piece of your book. It just really spoke to me. And I think a lot of people get a lot of that. So how does somebody in this workforce today, how does a company stand out and change their mindset to it being a challenge to being solution driven? And then the idea between fishing and hunting.
Well, there's a lot there to chew on. Let's break it down.
You pick what you want.
Well, first of all, most business owners, business managers go into their business. The biggest challenge they think they're going to come against is getting customers. How are we going to get customers for this business? How am I going to drive revenue? And while that's a concern, it's not long after they get into business that they realize the biggest issue they have is the people side of the equation, because naturally to be in business, you need to hire people, and you want those people to approach the business the same way you would as their owners, or feeling like they're stakeholders. And so they're going to work for you the way they would work for themselves. The problem with that is most business owners and managers and leaders get to that position because they are driven, and they've exceeded expectations. They're the ones that, have a solid work ethic. They're gung-ho. And then there's this expectation that the other people that they hire are just like them, miniature versions of them or younger versions of them, and they're going to approach business the exact same way. So what they do is they try to manage those people the way they were managed, right? They go, okay, I'm just the golden rule. I'm going to treat these people like I was treated. And that assumes there's nothing wrong with the golden rule if everybody is exactly like you and their idea of gold is the same as you have. But what if those people are different? What if their expectations are different? What if they're approaching the job with a different set of attitudes, values, and beliefs? What if they don't want the same things out of that particular job that you want? Now, all of a sudden, it becomes herding cats. How are we going to get these people with this, that are so disparate in their views and their likes and their dislikes to follow us as leaders and do what we want them to do? And that becomes the biggest issue. So first and foremost, it's not that we have to abandon who we are. In fact, we have to really be solid about who we are, but we have to, as Covey said so many years ago, is seek to understand before trying to be understood. Really understanding that these are individuals, right? It's not groupthink. We can't just say, because you're this age, because you have this background, because I knew your little brother, or because, you played basketball, or because you're this or that. We're going to go ahead and make assumptions about you and then start managing you to those expectations. What we're going to do is we're going to get to know you. We're going to find out who you are and what you are. And then we're going to try to make you the best version of of what you want to come. We're going to try to find that intersection between where you want to go and where I want to go, so that I can, join forces and make a better you, helping you to help us become a better version of us. I know that sounds like doublespeak, but really is so important to really understand those individuals. I hope that makes sense, John.
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, building the relationships, literally not talking about being in the people business, but being in the people business and getting to know your people. 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, certainly that wasn't the case. And you actually were on, cutting edge, 30 years ago when you wrote the book, Generation Y, which is an awesome book. Everybody needs to do that. Understanding the millennial generation and how they should not be managed the way the prior generation was, really learning how generations evolve. But I think too, the mindset is, it's very difficult to find people. I come from, a leader in my company that basically does not want to hear that. Those words should not come out. They should not be coming out of anybody's mouths walking the corridors of our building. Of course, it's hard. It always was hard. 16-year-olds, were tough then and they're tough today. But rather than dwelling on how difficult it is, how do you take more of a positive approach to this market?
Well, as you mentioned, understand. I mean, there's nothing new about generational differences. When we expect people to be exactly like us, and they're not exactly like us, and they do have a different set of values, attitudes, and beliefs, and we assume that they're just miniature versions of us, that's where the conflict comes from. So to take a positive approach is to first of all realize, no, there's a lot of people out there. It's just finding the right people, right? And how do we do that? We can't just assume that everybody we bring on is going to want a career with us and want the same career trajectory. So if we do that, age-old thing, just put our arm around their shoulders and walk them around the premises and say, okay, just do what I do, and someday all of this and more can be yours. You just do what I do. Do what I tell you to do, and guess what? Someday you're going to rise through the ranks. Well, that assumes that person wants exactly what you want, but they may come into the job, that 16-year-old or 26-year-old or 46-year-old, and not want what you want. Maybe they don't aspire to that. Maybe instead of thinking, career, they're thinking car, or they're thinking car speakers, or they're thinking, I'm going to make enough money to go, hang out on a beach during spring break. They may not have. That's why you first have to know where they're from. Of course, that happens in an interview. So the reality is, John, is it hard to find people? Well, it may be hard to find the right people. That's very, very true. If you're just putting out a fishing net saying now hiring, anybody and everybody is welcome to apply, and we'll just take you and throw you into our meat grinder system, and somehow we're going to train you so that you all of a sudden become exactly what we want. It's an old school mentality that really doesn't work. So what we have to start with is, instead of saying, hey, is it hard to find people? Let's start with a question. What are you looking for? Right? And I'm not saying what position. Well, I'm looking for a pizza delivery driver. I'm looking for a burger flipper. I'm looking for someone who will clean hotel rooms, etc. I mean, specifically, what is it that you're looking for in your business? What kind of individuals thrive in your environment? And if you've got an environment where you've got these frontline jobs, which is my specialty, helping people with those frontline, hard to fill jobs. We're not talking executives. We're not talking, hey, we need an engineer, or we need a microsurgeon, or whatever it is. We're talking about people who do the real work, roll up their shirt sleeves, and are going to approach the business and do the jobs that maybe we find unsexy. How do we find those people? Well, first thing we have to do is realize what that really entails. Right? What does that look like, and what does that entail? And once we know what that job description is, it becomes easier to find those individuals than it does, we're just looking for people.
Yeah. And in your book, again, you use the story of the business you and your wife opened up, and the young man you found at the tech school, which was awesome. And then The other thing was the mentality, the approach of fishing versus hunting. And when I was reading it and thinking about it, I was like, well, fishing is hunting, but then it's really not. Fishing, the way I looked at it was fishing is throwing a lure out there and into a big ocean and just hoping something bites, where hunting is being more specific and going after what you want, but also identifying and knowing exactly what you want. So can you expand on the difference, the philosophy of hunting versus fishing, which is brilliant?
Well, again, fishing is let's throw our pole in the water and hope that some fish bites and we can pull them into our boat, right? I use the analogy because I'm a very mediocre fisherman. I mean, I'm really not a sportsman. Although I live in this beautiful state of Colorado, there's lots of lakes and lots of people who are really into the sport. So when, let's just talk about a crummy fisherman like myself. What do? I go buy the cheapest pole. I go buy, inexpensive bait or maybe some worms that are out in my yard or whatever. And I go up to a mountain lake and throw my pole in the water, hoping I'll catch a fish. The reality is fishing is secondary. I'm just trying to get away from a Wi-Fi signal and collect my thoughts in the beauty of nature. But there's a lot of people that look for employees the same way. They put up a help wanted sign, they post an ad on, one of the job boards or whatever, and they expect with that bait that those prize winning trout, bass, walleye are going to just all of a sudden come to them. And the analogy says, stop fishing and start hunting. Now, if you look at an experienced hunter, they're not just out there with a rifle going, I'm going to shoot anything that moves. I don't care if it's a squirrel or a cricket or a crawdad. They go out and go, I want this specific target. I want an elk. I want a male elk. I want a 12-point buck. I'm going to take one shot, right? But I'm going to get what I'm looking for. So they study the habits, right? Where are they going to be? They're going to go where they are. They're going to dress, attire themselves. They're going to try to camouflage, whatever it is, so that they can get that exact animal that they're looking for, right? That's what I'm talking about. A mediocre fisherman compared to an experienced, serious hunter. So think about hunting in terms of, I know what I want for my business. I know what it takes to succeed. I'm looking for this position right here. Someone who fills this position right here, they can work these hours. This is about what they can do. Hey, I remember 3 people that I've hired that position, and all of them were successful. They stayed with me for a while. Well, wait a second. Where did I go? Where did I go to find those individuals? Go back and look at their applications. How did the interview go, right? What courses were they taking in school, or what made them, where are their common denominators? Because success leaves clues. And if I know where I found those individuals, I can go back to that same hunting ground, right? I can look the same way I did then. It's just following the patterns and finding those key factors that made that person thrive in that environment, and then saying, I want to duplicate that, because I believe that success right there, there's a lot I can learn from that in terms of bringing someone on. And we can learn the same from our failures. Why do these people, these individuals how come they're not staying with me? How come they're not performing? Whatever that might be. Well, maybe those individuals have certain things in common, and I need to look at those tendencies and say, that might not be the best fit for my business. So that's the fishing versus hunting mentality. Instead of just any port in a storm, I'll bring somebody on, sometimes we go out and we go, look, we want the quarterback of the football team or the editor of the yearbook and the head cheerleader, and we want this, we want that, because they're super achievers. And then we turn around and go, but they failed to work for me. Why? Because they were so busy in their other activities, or because their mind was shifting and they were involved with this or that. Maybe that's not the best fit. We've got to find out that key fit, what those things are, and then go to where we found success there before, and then duplicate that process.
Yeah, and I love how, again, you speak to everyone's looking for help, and that's what they start with. But you talk about how you need to have a good culture first. And then the second thing I'm thinking you're saying is once you've identified and have a good culture, then you have to identify the person that fits that and be
And,
specific and
and,
be
and you
detailed.
know, John, you make a great point. I haven't brought up the word, but the C word, culture,
Yeah,
that's so key because it
right.
doesn't matter how great of a recruiter you are. If you've got a crappy workplace, a
Yeah,
crappy culture, nobody really enjoys being there. It doesn't matter how great you are in the recruiting end. It doesn't matter how high of wage you're paying. You're going to have a hole in your employment where that people are just going to fall through. They don't like working there. So, you know, making sure that you have a great workplace. And that's not something that you can evaluate. Hey, I have a good workplace because I pay these people more than I was paid when I was young. And boy, my boss was mean and I try to be nice. That culture is what is defined. It's defined by the people that work with you. So being able to talk to them, surveying them, listening to them, finding out if somebody leaves the job, why did they leave? If you find you got a lot of turnover in your place and you're doing exit interviews or you're discussing what's happening and getting to the truth where people aren't afraid to tell you the real reason that they're leaving. Once you uncover that, then you can go, you know what? Maybe I have something here I need to work on. So having a great workplace, because word spreads. You know, if you're in a restaurant and you make the best burger in the world, it doesn't take long for people to say, oh man, you got to go down to, XYZ. You got to go back down to Jenny's Burgers or, Freddy's Pizza. They're the best. Word spreads. What's the same thing when it comes to your culture? When you've got a great workplace culture, people talk, oh man, I love working at, Pete's place. Man, that is amazing, or whatever that is. Because then once people go, wow, that sounds like a great place to work, word spreads and your application flow increases. So it starts by being a great place to work. Then you begin to work on that recruiting piece. And where am I going to hunt and how am I going to hunt? And you need, as a business leader or owner, you need to spend as much time on the people side of your business, bringing good employees in, getting the right talent on your team as you do marketing and operating your business. If you spend as much time recruiting, you're going to get great people, great culture, and it's going to help you sell your business. More customers will come, if that makes sense.
No, you know what? Just that last 30, 40 seconds is so key because what we see too often is companies are motivated through the bottom line, making money. Every business needs to do that, and they do that by driving the top line. And then, where can we cut and nip and tuck at the front line? The business that I've seen succeed, and the business that you've seen succeed in your research, 30 years and plus, extensive research that you've done through your books and stuff. But every one of those companies that are successful focus on the front line to drive the top line and then take care of the bottom line. And we see a lot of, I see a lot of business owners talking about the P&L and line items. And what you said was so key. And I believe this: if you go after recruiting employees or team members as hard or maybe harder than you do getting customers, you'll be more successful than if you just go after customers.
Customers will come.
Yeah.
Customers want to go to a place where they get outstanding service. We don't want to shop at a vending machine, right? We don't want that vending machine service. That snotty person at the counter who really doesn't give a flip about us, regardless of what coupons they have, what specials you're running, the ad that you posted, even what your brand is, right? If you can't deliver on that promise of outstanding service, I've never worked with a business who didn't say, man, we compete on service. Do you? Are you really focused on service? Because if you're focused on service, you're not just, getting in the face of your frontline employees going, hey, give good service. Wait a second, we're going to build a culture where they want to be. We're going to hire the kind of people who instinctively want to give great service, not just because they get a tip afterwards, but that's who they are. It makes them feel great inside when somebody receives great service, and they feel incomplete if somebody leaves with less than stellar service. That's what we want to have, that kind of culture where people say, we're in this together, right? We're in this together, and we're going to make sure that no matter who we're doing business with, the people that come here today, they're going to leave in a better state than they came in.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think when people hear that, they're like, oh yeah, well, of course, in the real world, that sounds great and all, but that's not the way it really is. And I think that goes back to my original thing where the mindset of, okay, it's hard to find good people because the more you describe the person you want, the fewer of them are. And when you're looking at this much and you're looking for that, of course that's hard, but it's not impossible. And I think having more of an optimistic approach rather than a pessimistic approach is super important as well.
John, when I was when I was a teenager, we had to buy our own cars in my house. My dad was a Depression era baby, and if you wanted a car, you had to buy your own car. So, you take part-time jobs, deliver papers, mow lawns, do whatever you could to earn enough for that first car, whatever that was. Well, then came the process of buying the car, right? And so you saved up this money. Now you're going to buy a car. And we would open the morning paper, right? Because back then there was no Craigslist there. You didn't see images and pictures. You weren't going to go on to a car dealership. You were going to try to buy a used car. And so we'd open the big paper. Back then it was the Rocky Mountain News or the Denver Post. Again, I'm a Colorado guy. And there were, 5 huge pages of automobiles for sale by owner, right? And we would start at, Audi, and we wouldn't quit till we got to Volkswagen. I mean, you'd go all the way through the paper. And my dad would start circling cars. He'd start saying, well, here's one that, here's a school bus. You could take a lot of your friends with you. Oh, wait a second. Here's a Corvette. Oh, it doesn't have a rear end. By the time we were done, you were so confused. You didn't know what to do because you were looking at everything.
Ooh,
it was a little different when my kids started driving. We still had a classified section, believe it or not. But I would always start with, what do you need a car for? And one kid might say, because I'm in a band and we're playing, different shows, on the weekends where, this is what I want to do. Well, you're playing the drums, right? Yeah. So you need to bring your drums with you. Yeah. Well, you're probably going to need a vehicle that will haul drums, right? I mean, a little sports car really isn't going to work for you. Am I right? Right. Are you going to work during this period? Yeah. So is gas mileage important to you? And I could go on and on, but you get the drift. By the time we were done, we had narrowed whether it was foreign or domestic, front wheel drive, rear wheel drive. One kid wanted to go skiing on the weekends. Naturally, he needed a 4-wheel drive to get up the mountain passes. But when you started with the values, here's what we're doing. Here's why we want this vehicle. This is what the vehicle needs to do. Once we did that, we could identify the vehicle and look specifically for that vehicle, and the hunting became easy. Same scenario when you're looking for people in your business, right? Rather than, we're just looking for good people. That's what people say. We can't find any good people. What's a good people? Yeah. Is there anybody that says, oh, I'm a bad people? What is a good people? And what is a good people? What does that look like in your business? And what do you need them to do? And what hours do you need them to work? What is it you're specifically looking for? Because when you nail that down, when you nail down specifically what you're looking for, it becomes so much easier to find. Most people think, well, that's harder to find. It's much easier because you can define it and you can go to where that is, as opposed to, hey, any port in a storm.
Right. I'm so glad you said that, because when you ask somebody who they want, they're like, well, I want somebody like this and that. I'm like, okay, well, that's just the arm. What about the other arm? And they're like, oh, well, that's a lot of specifics. And I think that's, while people agree that that's important, they don't want to put the work in, and they want to they want to step over that step. And to me, the most important step in the process is knowing exactly who you want, exactly down to
Bingo.
the fingernail. And again, Top Gun pilots, the best of the best, they measured these guys down to the millimeters. So I was thinking too, and I was going to ask, and then I want to kind of end on a personal thing, but in looking at your books, um, three of them in particular, um, you know, uh, Fire on Work, right? Reviving Work Ethic, and then the most recent is Fully Staffed, and giving somebody somewhat of a roadmap to follow, a toolbox. If these three books are in a toolbox, what book would you suggest they read first, and then maybe the second and third? Because I
Well,
really feel like that if they do look at these books, they take the time to read these books or listen to the books, okay, they will have a really good understanding of how to build a winning team through these three books here.
well, I appreciate that, John. Thank you. When you think about it, it's not necessarily in the order that I wrote the books. My focus and expertise, and for those of that don't know my background, I'm a former high school teacher and coach turned motivational speaker for teenagers. So I spent about 10 years in gymnasiums talking to entire student bodies of teenagers, trying to help them figure out, how do I get from here to there when I don't even know where there is, right? I am in school, and I'm going to be out in a year or 3 years or whatever. And I'm supposed to go to college, military? What am I going to do? Because this world is so confusing. And so what I tried to help them do is narrow so that they could say, I'm figuring out what I want to do, and I'm making a plan to get there. So in that process, and speaking with teenagers, I also started working with businesses who said, hey, we have this problem where, the people that we hire, they're different somehow. And that's why I got into generational studies. So my first book was called Employing Generation Y, and I spelled it WHY. Now that book is out of print, and it's out of print for a good reason, because it made assumptions about a generation now known as the millennial generation, and some of them were dead on. But I got to admit, some of those assumptions were not dead on. I couldn't paint with a broad brush and say, if you were born between this year and this year, you are like this. It wasn't true, right? It wasn't always true. So the millennial generation I've got millennial children, and now they have their own kids. Some of the assumptions were accurate, some of them aren't accurate, but the reality is, it really helped me get behind the scenes to understand what generational aspects play their hand in our hiring. So since then, I've written a couple of books, as you've mentioned. I wrote this Reviving Work Ethic book. It's called Reviving Work Ethic, A Leader's Guide to Ending Entitlement and Restoring Pride in the Emerging Workforce. And I wrote that book, Reviving Work Ethic, to help people who said, I need to develop the people because they don't have the same attitudes, values, and beliefs as I do. So if you're having problems developing the people that you have, this might be the book for you. The book that I wrote that you referenced, called On Fire Work, I wrote that book because people said, I went out and interviewed so many business leaders, owners, and operators. I mean, we're talking CEOs of major companies considered the best place to work in their respective industry. And I wanted to find out, how do you build that culture? Right? That kind of culture where people show up for work and work for you the way they would work for themselves if their name were on the brand. So I went into, hospitality and medical and manufacturing and service brands, all different kinds of brands, considered the best place to work in their industry, and tried to glean what I could about culture. And so that book, On Fire Work, was, how do I create this culture where people want to come? And then, as you mentioned, my latest book is called Fully Staffed, The Definitive Guide for Finding and Keeping Great Employees in the Worst Labor Market Ever. Now, granted, that book was written prior to anybody even hearing about a pandemic.
Crazy.
When unemployment in most major metropolitan areas was below 3%. So by the time the book came out, all of a sudden, here's the pandemic, unemployment starts soaring. But the reality is, we're still in a dire labor market where people are struggling with finding and keeping great people. Well, this book gives specific tactics on where you can hunt. Where are those hunting grounds? How do I go to a high school or college job fair? What am I supposed to do when I'm there, right? How do I set up a booth? How do I recruit from that after? How do I set up a program for employee referrals where I can really start getting my employees excited about sending their friends? How do I do on-premise signage that really works to increase application flow? How can I recruit retirees, or perhaps maybe people that have certain disabilities in certain areas, but would work out great for our business. Ex-military, maybe even second chance offenders, people who've been released, made a mistake in their life, and they're back out looking for a second chance. So that book gives specific tactics on what you need to do to bring in those frontline people by looking at all these various hunting grounds. So anyway, that's the genesis of those books. I don't know which one you would want to read first. It kind of depends upon where you think you are in your hiring process. Do we need to work on our culture? Do I need to work on developing people? Or do I need to, do I really need to focus on where I'm going and how I'm going to approach those various hiring pools so that I can expand my application flow?
Perfect. That's exactly. And I think what I really would recommend anybody who's going to listen to this is that it's not so much an opinion as it is you've done the research years and years and years, and going in and talking to all these businesses and knowing that you've done that, and asking the leading questions to get honest, real answers. I love all three of them, and definitely feel like that's a great explanation of which book you might need at that particular time. And I don't want to take too much of your time because I know you're busy, but you kind of alluded to it actually in the last part of the conversation, where you talked about young people not knowing where they want to go. And the purpose of the podcast is to, again, to become the best version of yourself in order to become the best leader for others. And we always talk about, if you're a mess, who's going to follow you?
Right.
And this is a bigger question, but one thing that you taught me years ago was when I was trying to figure out where I want to go in this kind of area of my life, the books, the research, my experiences. And, I was going after this, and I was going after that, and I was going after this. And you very quietly listened to me, just the way you're looking at me right now, as a matter of fact. And you said, what's your one thing? And I think I answered back 5 more things. And you said, no, what's your one thing? And then I finally got it. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what my one thing is. So if you're a person that's in a leadership position because you've ascended to that through your work, we talk about working smarter, not harder, but that's not fair, because if you don't know, how can you work smart? So I guess to zero in on the question is, if you were to, what would be your advice in helping somebody become the best version of themselves by finding their lane? Maybe. I think that's actually one of the words you used way back when.
Well, I was raised in a house. I mean, you see a photograph of my father up here in the military. My dad was a jack of all trades. I mean, he had a 10th grade education, but a PhD in life. There was nothing he couldn't do pretty well. Nothing he couldn't do pretty well. I mean, he knew just about everything pretty well, but he never really found that thing that to propel him forward, because he was trying to do so much. And I really think sometimes business leaders, owners, operators, we try to do it all. And I think, you got to be smart enough to know you're not smart enough to do it all. So you play to your strengths. When you go in business, what got you there? What do you really specialize in? Focus on that. Yes, develop the other areas. You don't turn around and say, well, I'm really good with numbers. I'm no good with people, so I'll let somebody else do that and I'll just focus on numbers. Now you got to grow other areas too, but you got to realize, what is your strength? Where is your strength? Where is your gift? Play to that gift the best that you possibly can, and then try to develop other areas. You want to develop your weaknesses. You want to be the best version of yourself. Well, how can you grow yourself if you don't know yourself? There's so many assessments. There's so many cool instruments that we can, if we're brave enough to figure out, okay, so where am I as an individual? I mean, we can go back to the Myers-Briggs. There's all these various personal assessments, DISC assessments, etc. Look at, go and talk to people that you really count on. I know personal development coaches, and I'm not real big in that area, but I do believe they serve a purpose. Professional development coaches, and sometimes what they do is a 360 evaluation, and they talk to people in your life. They talk to business associates, members of your family, friends, people you've worked with and for, clients, vendors. They do these assessments so that they can get a full picture and come back and go, these are your strengths and weaknesses according to the people that you've talked to.
Yeah.
Now we're going to look and see how we can develop those, but know where your gifts really are and try to play to what those gifts really are. Know what you're really, really good at. Understand that, and also know what you're not good at. Do the best you can at developing those areas. Don't just leave them behind and say, I'm no good at that, so I'm never going to do it. Try to understand the best. You don't have to be a jack of all trades, but you do need to know what your specialties are. You need to thrive and play to that, and always keep a mindful eye towards, where do I need to improve? How can I improve? There's a difference between a windshield vision and a rear view mirror vision. The windshield says, I'm seeing the world through my eyes. The rear view mirror says, I'm going to take a look at myself. And I'm going to see myself maybe the way other people see me. That's painful and it's hard, but you got to look in that mirror every once in a while. Take a look at yourself and say, doggone it, I need to stop doing this. I need to start doing this, right? These are the things I need to develop myself fully, right? Yes, I need to see the view, but what am I good at and what am I not good at, right? And then push yourself forward in those directions.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just for young people. It's for people my age. And, I want to personally thank you because we met at a very difficult point in my life. And your mentoring and your friendship was there. And you actually helped me discover my passion and what I'm good at. And anytime I started getting off course, you always kind of nudged me back in and said, no, this is, you're good at this. Stay here. And so I want to personally thank you for that. I don't know if I've ever really mentioned that to you before, but I think of you as a big influence on my life at a very, very difficult time, maybe the hardest time of my life. So
I tell you what, John, I've been amazed. I've been a big fan of your career and your trajectory, and knowing what your gift was. Everyone in your organization refers to as coach, because everyone looks at you as their coach, a person who really helps develop people. That's why I wanted to do this podcast. I get so many invitations, but when you gave me an invitation to do your podcast, I said, absolutely, because I know when it comes to developing the leader within, you know how to do that and bring the best forward, because you've been strong enough and brave enough to take critique and, I don't want, dare I say, criticism, but direction from somebody like me. And we didn't know each other well back when that conversation happened, but I am so thankful that I got to meet you and I could offer some words that bonded us together. And so we've been friends this many years later. But truly, you are an individual that believes in other people and knows how to develop them. And so thanks for making me a part of this podcast.
Yeah, no problem. And I appreciate it. And, our friendship is something I cherish, and I hope to chat with you again soon. And I will share, your website, and definitely get these books out to people. And you have a lot of other tools on your site that people can do and go to. So thank you again. I appreciate it, and hope to see you soon, but definitely talk soon.
Absolutely, John. The best of luck to you and all your listeners. Thank you so much for having me a part of your podcast.
Thank you for coming on.